What up, nerds? This is Reverse Worldbuilding, the show for people who wish mythology had just a little bit more science in it. My name's Moya McTeer, and today we're talking about the Banshee. The Banshee comes from Celtic mythology, originally from somewhere in what we now consider Scotland. The word Banshee literally comes from the Irish words ban, meaning woman, and she, meaning fairy mound. So Banshee would mean woman of the fairy mound. There are a lot of fairy myths in Irish and Scottish mythology, so this fits right in. The Banshee is usually depicted as a woman, either very old or very young and beautiful, but they're always pale skinned. Makes a lot of sense. People in Ireland and Scotland have pale skin, so their myths and legends probably would too. So the Banshee has pale skin. The Banshee is usually crying, so they have these red weeping eyes. The Banshee's, I think, like telltale or characteristic trademark is its loud scream. So the Banshee can let out this wail or this keen, this loud cry that can actually be really painful to hear. But they aren't just doing that for no reason. The Banshee will cry when someone is about to die. They don't cause the death, but they will issue a warning that a death is about to happen. So given all of those characteristics, let's start thinking about what type of planet the Banshee could have realistically evolved on. First, let's deal with the Banshee's pale skin. You see it here in patterns on Earth where people who live closer to the equator have darker skin, and people whose ancestors are from closer to the poles have paler skin. All that has to do with is the amount of direct sunlight that you would get based on where you live. So if you have pale skin, you probably don't get much direct sunlight, and I'm imagining that that's what's happening here with the Banshee. For some reason or another, the Banshee doesn't get a lot of direct sunlight on its planet. Next, let's talk about the Banshee's red, weepy eyes. It's possible that all Banshees are just really sad, so they're crying all the time, but it's much more likely that the entire population would be affected if there's some environmental thing going on. Scientists for a long time have been pretty confused about why humans cry when we're sad. Like, why is this physical process tied to deep feelings and emotion, but tears also do other beneficial things besides telling people around us that they should probably leave us alone. So when you get something in your eyes, your tear ducts will fill up and cause you to cry so that you can flush that foreign object out of your eye. And I think that that's probably what's going on with the Banshee on its native planet. The planet probably is very dusty, very dry, has a lot of dust storms, and so when those dust storms happen, the Banshee would get dust caught in their eyes, and they would cry to get them out. And if there are dust storms all the time, then the Banshee would have to be constantly crying to flush all of that dust and sand out of their eyes. Now let's tackle the Banshee trademark, its loud wail. So I imagine that this is probably a combination of the Banshee having strong lungs, but also sound carrying really well and far and easily on the Banshee's planet. And I can think of one planet characteristic that would make both of those things happen: a thick atmosphere. For this to make more sense, I should probably tell you how sound travels. So light is both a particle and a wave, meaning it can travel through an empty medium, or a vacuum, like space. But sound travels over pressure waves. So you have to have molecules or particles that are hitting each other over great distances for sound to get from one place to another. That's why there's no sound in space, because space is too empty. There aren't enough particles for the pressure waves to actually propagate through the medium. But sound and light actually travel at different speeds through different materials, through different media. And if you have a very thick atmosphere, then you have a lot of particles packed close together, and so it makes it really easy for sound to travel very quickly through that medium. The other benefit in this case of having a thick atmosphere is that there would be a lot of pressure, which means it would be harder to breathe. If a human went to a planet with a much thicker atmosphere, our lungs would have a much harder time expanding fully and we would have a hard time breathing. But if you are a banshee and you evolve on this planet that has a thick atmosphere, you develop very strong lungs that can expand even under the crushing force of this thick atmosphere's pressure. There are a lot of different reasons to have a thick atmosphere. If you have a slightly more massive planet, then it's easier to hold on to a thick atmosphere because your gravity will keep the molecules in the atmosphere from flying away. It could also just be a function of having heavier elements in your atmosphere. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, and then that's followed by oxygen, a little bit of carbon dioxide, and other gases in quickly diminishing percentages. But maybe they have heavier elements in their atmosphere, which makes it easier for the atmosphere to glom on to this planet. Another thing that will get rid of atmospheres would be a very strong stellar wind. So our sun and other stars, of which our sun is just an average one, are constantly giving off these waves, this wind of charged particles. Those charged particles will interact with planet atmospheres and can actually strip gas away from those atmospheres. That's happening in our solar system all the time. Actually, the solar wind is what has stripped away most of Mars's atmosphere, but Earth is protected from that stripping solar wind by a strong magnetic field. So there are a few different ways that the Banshee planet could get a thick atmosphere. It might have a very strong magnetic field, it might have a slightly more massive planet, or it might have heavier elements or molecules in the atmosphere. Now let's get to the reason why banshees can fill people's nightmares, the fact that they are related to death. So I said before, they don't cause death, they just warn people that death is happening, but I mean there's still that close tie between banshees and death, and so people are often afraid of banshees if they don't know much about this mythological creature. But why would a banshee be able to predict death? Yeah, there are magical reasons, but that's not what I do here. I try to explain myths using science. And so when I think about the fact that banshees can predict death, I start thinking about dogs and how dogs have a very strong sense of smell, and they can actually be trained to detect illnesses and diseases on humans. In humans? They can detect illnesses and diseases with their strong sense of smell. And so I imagine that the banshee probably has a very strong sense of smell, which could be a consequence of two different things working together. So one, the banshee probably just has a lot of olfactory receptors in its nose. Olfactory receptors are the things in your nose that will actually catch in the chemical compounds that produce smell, and then they will send it to your brain so that your brain can process it. The reason why dogs have a much stronger sense of smell than humans is because they have so many more olfactory receptors. The other thing that would give a banshee a really strong sense of smell is if smell just carried really easily through this planet's atmosphere. And that actually is taken care of by having a thick atmosphere. Smell doesn't carry in quite the same way that sound does by pressure waves, but smell does have to be carried through air, and if the air is thicker, or if it's moving a lot with wind, or if it's warm, which means the particles are moving faster, then the smell will carry faster. And we've already covered that this planet has a thick atmosphere, so there are lots of molecules closely packed together, and there are lots of dust storms, which means there's a lot of wind. So both of those things combined means that smell can probably travel really easily on this planet, and that means that the banshee can have a strong sense of smell. It can smell when something's about to die, and then it can give its keening wail when that's about to happen. And then the last thing about banshees being said to disappear in a cloud of mist or fog if they're seen, yeah, that's probably just because the banshee is on a planet that has a lot of dust storms, and if you see a banshee, there's probably a dust storm about to happen because they're just so common. So it's not that the banshee has this magical ability to create fog and dust out of nothing so it can disappear from human sight. It just lives on a planet with a lot of dust storms. So to wrap it all up, I imagine that this Banshee lives on a planet that has a lot of dust storms, so it's a very dry, dusty, sandy planet. It doesn't have a lot of exposure from sunlight, so it probably orbits a small, dim star. The planet also has a very thick atmosphere, which means it might have a strong magnetic field, or the planet might be more massive than Earth. And that takes care of the Banshee being pale, having red weepy eyes, having this loud scream that it can emit from its lungs, and having a very strong sense of smell so it can predict when other people are about to die. So that's my Banshee planet. I hope you liked it. If you did like this video, then share it with your friends and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new one when it comes out. And if you have ideas for other mythological or legendary creatures that I can reverse world build, then be sure to write those in the comments and I will add them to my list. But thanks for watching.